Hello and welcome to ARIRANG News. It's 2 in the afternoon here in Seoul, and I'm Lee Ji-yoon. Here are the stories that we're following at this hour. Entering her third year in office, President Park Geun-hye promises to reshuffle her staff and cabinet to better carry out her policies and step up cooperation with political parties. Salaried workers in Korea are angry about the government's new tax code. In response, Korea's finance minister says the government will take a closer look to make the necessary changes. Korea's oil consumption costs are expected to dip to their lowest level in 4 decades thanks to tumbling global crude oil prices. This is expected to add up to $40 billion in savings for Korea. Entering her third year in office, President Park Geun-hye has promised to reshuffle her staff and cabinet. By doing so, the president hopes to increase her administration's efficiency while sharpening its focus on revitalizing the economy. At a cabinet meeting, she also talked about appointing special advisors to better cooperate with political parties in carrying out her state policies. As for the latest case of child abuse at a daycare center, the president called it, quote, deplorable. She called on officials to strictly enforce the government's new one-strikeout system for daycare centers and caretakers found to have abused children. And many salaried workers here in Korea weren't so happy about the country's tax law revisions, saying that they now have to pay more taxes. But Korea's finance minister said this morning that is not true. Our Park Geun-hye has the details.
A public outcry forced Korean Finance Minister Park Geun-hye to stand before reporters on Tuesday over the government's change in tax policy. He said the change that comes into force this year aims to redistribute wealth to low-income families.
Changing tax benefits from tax deductions into tax credits will raise the tax burden on high-income earners, but will decrease the burden on low-income workers.
Many salaried workers have been slamming the government, saying they will face heavier tax burden under the new system. The minister responded that while the government had collected more tax every month and returned the balance later, the new tax policy collects less every month and returns less. But he did pledge to monitor the tax burdens.
We are reviewing better ways to settle income tax, including tax reduction for retirees and families with many children.
Korea's tax revenue has fallen short of the target in the past few years, with the deficit for last year estimated at around 9 to 14 billion US dollars. For this year, the National Assembly Budget Office estimated the shortfall will reach around $2.8 billion. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
A South Korean activist group flew 100,000 anti-North Korea leaflets across the inter-Korean border last night, a move that will likely stir up tension on the Korean peninsula. The leader of the civic group, Fighters for a Free North Korea, said Tuesday that the leaflets were sent from the border city of Paju with some 20 U.S. activists from the Human Rights Foundation. However, they didn't launch the DVDs of The Interview, a comedy film about an assassination plot against North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The South Korean activists have threatened to spread the DVDs if North Korea doesn't accept South Korea's offer for talks. Last week, the government asked civic groups to refrain from launching such leaflets. Meanwhile, the U.S. National Security Agency has apparently been tapping into North Korea's computer networks since long before the North hacked into Sony Pictures. Officials say the agency's data collected through the top-secret operation is what made it possible for the U.S. to pin the attack on North Korea. Our Kim Hyun-bin tells us more.
The U.S. National Security Agency has exploited North Korea's computer systems since 2010 in a top-secret cyber operation conducted with the help of South Korea and other U.S. allies. A report published in the New York Times on Monday says the American spy agency probed Chinese networks that connect North Korea to the outside world, getting direct access in the north. The paper quotes officials who say malware was placed in Pyongyang's computer systems so the NSA could track networks and computers used by North Korean hackers, a force the South Korean military estimates at roughly 6,000. Most are controlled by Pyongyang's main intelligence service, the Reconnaissance General Bureau, and Bureau 121, a covert hacking unit that has a large outpost in China. Before the Sony case, the United States had never directly accused another country of launching a cyber attack on it. Senior military officials say the evidence gathered through the software and presented to President Barack Obama left them no doubt that Pyongyang was responsible. One former U.S. official said that when the U.S. first gained access to the North's computer networks, it was mainly focused on the North's nuclear program and its leadership, as well as direct military threats to U.S. and Seoul. But the surveillance program was expanded after a destructive attack on South Korea's banks and media companies in 2013. The story is now raising questions among experts in the U.S. about why. According to one source, American intelligence agencies couldn't really understand the severity of the situation given the time they spent inside the North's computer networks, and why they weren't able to warn Sony about the attack. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government says the sixth round of talks with Japan on the issue of wartime sex slavery was meaningful and constructive. This statement comes after Korea's chief delegate Lee Sang-deok and his Japanese counterpart Junichi Ihara met for 3 hours in Tokyo on Monday. Speaking to reporters after the talks, Lee said the talks went smoothly and the two sides will continue to try to reach a solution. He added that, though, he couldn't say too much, given that the talks are supposed to be confidential, but it appears no breakthrough was made. Korea wants a sincere apology from Japan and compensation for the victims, but Tokyo says the issue was dealt with in a bilateral treaty signed in 1965. The meeting comes as Korea and Japan are seeking to improve their frosty relations, as this year marks the 50th anniversary of the normalization of their bilateral ties. And Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, currently on a tour to the Middle East, has declared Tokyo's determination that a mass human tragedy such as the Holocaust should never be repeated again. This message was during his visit to the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, but Abe failed to make any mention of his own country's wartime atrocities. Our Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
Laying a wreath at the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem on Monday, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe condemned the war crimes committed by Nazi Germany.
Today, I learned how merciless humans can be by singling out a group of people and making them the object of discrimination and hatred.
Abe recalled Chinue Sugihara, a Japanese diplomat who saved thousands of Jews during World War II.
Chiune Sugihara gave hope to Jewish refugees by signing transit visas for them to escape to Japan.
A senior Japanese foreign ministry official said the message was to cover Abe's overall diplomacy for this year, which falls on the 70th anniversary of the war's end. But Abe made no mention of Japan's own wartime atrocities, such as its sexual enslavement of some 200,000 women, many of whom were Korean. Such acts are seen as part of Abe's efforts to dispel international misgivings that he's trying to revise history. Korea and China, the major victims of Japan's militaristic past, continue to call on Tokyo to issue a sincere apology for its past wrongdoings. While Tokyo's relations with its neighbors remain at a historic low, all eyes are on the so-called Abe statement to be issued in August, which is expected to express Japan's remorse over the war. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Korea, a major importer of oil, stands to reap economic benefits from the recent slump in global crude oil prices. Analysts estimate that Korea could save as much as nearly $40 billion. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
Korea is expected to benefit from tumbling crude prices. According to the IMF and the Korea Energy Economic Institute, the cost of Korea's oil consumption is expected to drop to 1.7% of the GDP this year. That's the lowest level in 45 years. The estimate is based on an IMF forecast for global oil prices of $56.7 per barrel this year, a drop of 41% from a year earlier. The price slump of oil, along with other energy sources, is expected to create economic benefits for Korea in savings of between $19 billion and $38 billion. But who stands to see the biggest savings? For starters, households are expected to save an average of about $300 a year. It's estimated that oil consumption will make up about 3.5% of their total spending this year, down from roughly 4.3% last year. Businesses are likely to see savings as well. Analysts estimate that for every 10% drop in oil prices, Korea's exports jump 0.5% and production costs fall 1%. And considering that the IMF estimate for the global oil price is down more than 40% from last year, Korea's exports are expected to jump more than 2%, and the manufacturing sector would save about 4% in production costs this year. All in all, households are expected to save at least $10 billion, businesses $4 billion, and the government $2 billion. Experts say the economic benefits from the price drop will begin to show in the second quarter of the year. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
And Korea now ranks 5th in terms of global auto production and is number 3 in terms of auto exports. Our Kim Young-gil takes a look back on the last 60 years of the Korean auto industry and how companies like Hyundai and Kia have established themselves in the global market.
It's been 60 years since Korea manufactured its first car, the Shibal, back in 1955. The car, whose name translates as New Start, was created by adding a Korean engine to a U.S. military Jeep. Later in the 60s, the Korean government announced a series of measures to promote the auto industry. These efforts led to the establishment, in conjunction with foreign automakers, of 3 automobile companies, 2 of which are still in business, Hyundai and Kia Motors. With the technical assistance, Korea built its first modern assembly facilities and began assembling cars. Through continued collaborations with foreign car companies, Korea's first homegrown automobile, the Hyundai Pony, was built in 1975. Hyundai chalked up another first when it exported the Pony to South America in 1976. Then in the 80s, Korean automakers began focusing on developing mass production systems to build an export-oriented industry. And on January 20th, 1986, Hyundai entered the U.S. market with its Pony XL. It sold more than 168,000 cars, setting a record for selling the most cars in its first year of business. 3 years later, on the back of its initial success in the export market, Hyundai began designing and producing vehicles with its own technology. Last year, overseas shipments of Korean vehicles stood at more than 3 million units, and the value of Korea's auto exports reached an all-time high of nearly $49 billion. Hyundai and Kia Motors said Tuesday they had exported 100,000 vehicles for each of 17 car models last year. Now, as they pass the 60-year mark, Korean automakers are plugging into the latest trend and developing eco-friendly vehicles. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
Well, unemployment rate across the world is expected to continue to rise over the next few years due to the slow global economic recovery. The International Labor Organization's World Employment and Social Outlook Trends 2015 report said about 212 million people will be jobless by 2019, the number rising from around 200 million currently. While the report saw improved employment in the U.S. and Japan, it still found conditions in some European nations worrisome. Latin America, Africa, and Arab nations will also feel the pinch due to the falling oil and gas prices. The organization warns rising unemployment could result in income inequality and social unrest. The Chinese economy, the world's second largest, posted its slowest growth in 24 years last year. According to GDP data announced by its Statistics Bureau on Tuesday, China's gross domestic product expanded at 7.4% in 2014, missing Beijing's target by 0.1 percentage point. Also, the Chinese economy grew 7.3% during the October to December period last year. Eyes are now focused on how the Chinese government will deal with its relatively moderate growth, a setback to an economy used to double-digit growth. As the price war between OPEC nations and U.S. producer heats up, Iran has come out to say the industry is healthy enough to withstand the falling crude oil prices, even if it drops below $30 a barrel. Our Shin Se-min explains.
Iran's oil minister has stressed that his country's oil industry can easily ride out a long period of low prices, even saying Iran will be fine if prices drop to $25 a barrel. Iran's state-run Fars news agency says Bijan Zanganeh told reporters during a conference in Tehran that Iran sees no sign of a shift within OPEC towards action to support oil prices. Oil prices have tumbled nearly 30% since OPEC made its decision late last year to keep production unchanged at 30 million barrels a day. On Monday, Brent crude oil prices fell below $49 a barrel, pressured by a supply glut and OPEC's refusal to cut its output. And as a major oil producer, Iran is pushing hard not to hold an emergency meeting regarding falling global oil prices. The group's next scheduled meeting is set for June 5th. The minister says his country doesn't intend to hold an emergency meeting and is currently in talks with other OPEC member states in a bid to hold up falling oil prices, but these talks haven't been successful yet. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Moving on to the second report in our 5-part series on startups here in Korea. Today we're going to focus on one specific startup in the food delivery business that has broken new ground. Our Lee Ji-yoon tells us about the secret behind its success.
A number of apps have popped up in recent years, enabling users to order food without ever making a phone call. One of these is 배달 민족 by a startup company called Ua Brothers, and it's getting a lot of attention. The app, launched in 2010, is known for its user-friendly mobile platform. A commercial for the app, which looks like a movie trailer, went viral on social networking sites and YouTube.
아직도 전단지가 내가 다 정리해줄게.
배달 민족 currently dominates the app-based food delivery sector, estimated to be worth 1 trillion Korean won or $928 million US. Over 5 million deliveries were made through the app last month alone, with 150,000 restaurants participating nationwide. But what makes this company stand out is its potential, fueled by a major investment from Goldman Sachs.
I think the $36 million investment from Goldman Sachs shows a level of confidence, not just in 배달이 민족, but the Seoul startup ecosystem. There's a great level of talent. There are wonderful universities here pumping out incredibly educated students. There is investment coming in. And then the most important thing, there's drive and hunger to want to build.
What's the secret behind getting so much attention? What's the secret behind your success?
Sure. I think one of the best things about this company is that because of the structure that we have, anybody at any level can voice their opinion, and their opinion is extremely valuable.
This flat structure helps to better cater to consumer trends with the timely execution of ideas. It also sets the company apart from most Korean firms and startups that follow a top-down structure. So what's next? It plans to broaden its takeout focus to include all types of restaurants. The company also wants to go global. It has already partnered up with Line, a mobile messaging app owned by Korea's largest portal Naver, to expand into Japan. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Pansori is often referred to as Korea's version of opera, and like the opera, pansori has hundreds of years of history in Korean culture. But within the past few decades, the future of pansori has become increasingly uncertain. Our Im Yoon-hee joins us now with more about the traditional art form. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. So I'm sure you're well aware of what pansori is, but for those who are not, pansori is a Korean tradition of musical storytelling that involves a vocalist and a drum. While it was inscribed as a UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity in 2008, however, in recent days, the number of pansori masters has really been dwindling. Luckily, there are a few who are trying to change that. Take a look at this next report.
Some say it's never too early to begin training. At the young age of 8, these little girls have begun a journey unfamiliar to most kids their age. Their ultimate goal is to become a pansori master. To make sure they get there, they've been taken under the wing of one of Korea's leading pansori masters, an effort aimed at producing a new generation of performers. But it's the passion of these young artists that makes the biggest impression.
As the drum is being played and I hear the voices of others and my mood is lifted, sometimes I even want to dance.
At the start of the new year, these students and others, all under the guidance of Master Cho So-nyo, entered an intense training camp for 15 days, where they can learn all about the traditional art of pansori. Becoming a pansori master is no easy task. It may be below zero outside on a cold winter morning, but these students are up for the challenge.
Singing outside, I can hear our voices, but the sound is also echoed and amplified. This wide, open environment is very inspiring.
And who better to herd the young fledglings than Cho So-nyo, a pansori master who has even been declared an intangible cultural asset herself for her expert knowledge of chunyang, one of the songs in the pansori repertoire.
It's comforting to be able to study pansori with all these students. Hopefully they will continue to become great pansori masters.
Although these young girls have dedicated themselves to pansori, the harsh reality is that in the modern day, the number of those looking to learn the art has decreased dramatically, putting at risk the future of this age-old Korean tradition. Still, it's a beautiful part of Korea's culture, and we hope they carry forward for generations to come.
Okay, so what is one of the main reasons that pansori is facing, I guess, threat to its existence?
Right, so rapid modernization has really been cited as probably the main cause for, I guess, the decline in interest in pansori. It was originally an oral tradition that was passed down through the generations verbally from, say, grandmother to their children. But, really in this technology just filled days, it's really hard for people to get interested in pansori again. But in 1964, it was inscribed as a national intangible cultural property here in Korea, and that really did help to preserve pansori. It really added funds to pansori and made it really what it is today. So hopefully they'll continue that.
Okay, well, what is different from pansori today and I guess pansori from back in, I guess, the Joseon dynasty, let's say?
So pansori was prized really as an impromptu performance that could go on for almost up to 8 hours for some performances, and that really was the beauty of it, and that's what people really appreciated, was these vocalists were able to throw out these literary expressions and just this freedom about these performances. However, nowadays they're saying that the younger generation pansori performers don't really have this improvisational skill, and that is kind of affecting the, I guess, the look at pansori as a whole. And so these singers, the performers you saw in the report a little while ago, they really have the future of pansori in their hands, so we wish them all the luck.
Okay, thank you for your report.
You're very welcome.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Today is Daean in Korea, which is one of the coldest days of the season under the 24 solar terms that are part of the East Asian lunisolar calendar. Now, this morning was perfect evidence of that, with temperatures dropping down to -6 degrees. However, we'll see a huge jump, and the daytime highs are expected to be above the seasonal average and way above freezing. And we can expect a sunny day today, although more clouds are expected throughout the day, and also the air quality is looking good, with the fine dust level at normal for all regions across the country. Now, taking a look at the readings for today, Seoul will peak up to 4 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will top out at 7 and 10 degrees respectively. Now, moving over to other regions, Jeju Island gets up to 9, Dokdo hits down to 7, while Mangungang drops down low at -3 degrees. Well, that's all for now, Michelle Park, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
All right, that's all from me at this hour, but I'll be back with more in our next newscast at 4 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.